laugh because you experience a violation of expectations about how teachers are supposed to look and act, remembering back to how your teachers actually look and behave. Were you reacting emotionally to the same violation of expectations that the children were experiencing?
Whatever type of behavior psychologists look at, whether it's laughing, crying, making war, or making love, or anything else, they try to make sense of it by relating the observed behavior to certain aspects of the individual involved and the situation in which the behavior occurred.
For example, my genetic makeup, personality traits, attitudes, and mental state are some of the personal factors involved in my behavior. They're known as dispositional factors. They're internal, characteristics and potentials inside me. While external things such as sensory stimulation, rewards, or the actions of other people are known as situational factors. They come from the outside, from the environment in which my behavior takes place. If you want a graphic lesson in the influence of situational factors, take a look at this picture. Which is the tallest cowboy? Which is the shortest? Seems obvious, doesn't it? Now let's isolate them from their background context and compare them. You can see how the context of the situation, in this case the picture's background, misled your perception and judgment. Or take a look at this sign and read it out loud. Paris in the spring, right? But this is what it really says. Another violation of expectations, a case where your past experience creates a dispositional readiness to respond in a particular way. At the University of Illinois, psychologist Emmanuel Donchin discovered that even before we are consciously aware that our expectations have been violated, our brains have registered the event as peculiar. To study this phenomenon, Donchin has been making recordings of the brain's electrical activity, known as electroencephalograms, or EEGs.
The basic procedure we use is very simple. We put the standard EEG electrodes on a person's head and record the brain activity as the clinician records in a hospital. And then we create a series of events which repeat themselves, the same event over and over again. And our computers look at the brain activity and filter out the specific response to the events in which we're interested. And it turns out that this response to these events, which is called an event-related potential, has a series of waves in it.
Donchin is particularly interested in the P300 wave, the brain's characteristic response to an unexpected but important event.
You see a wave that begins about 250 thousandths of a second after a surprising and relevant event. It reaches a peak about 300 milliseconds, at least 300 milliseconds after the surprising event, and then there's a return to the baseline and subject's brain activity settles down.
In this experiment, Donchin elicits the P300 wave by presenting his subject with surprises in a list of names. Most of the names are men's names. Occasionally, there's an unexpected woman's name. The subject clicks a different button for male and female names. In the laboratory, monitors reveal that the brain responds to the unexpected names with the P300 wave.
If an event triggers an emotional response in the subject or produces some cognitive activity by the subject, we're interested in finding out the extent to which this emotional response or cognitive activity changes the way in which this brain activity that we can record behaves. And by looking at changes in brain activity in relation to psychological processes, we are trying to understand better the relationship between the mind and the brain.
When we study the smallest and most detailed processes of behavior, like the P300 brainwaves, we operate on what's known as the micro level of analysis. Typically, the micro level is used by psychologists who study things like the role of the brain in memory, for instance, or of hormones in sexual behavior. But most psychologists operate on the next level, the molecular level of analysis, which studies somewhat larger units of observable behavior, such as the speed of reacting to a simple stimulus. Or for a more complex example, let's take a look at a kind of behavior we use every day: body language. Our body language can reflect much of what we're thinking and feeling on the molecular level, just as P300 brainwaves can on the micro level. Psychologist Robert Rosenthal of Harvard University has pioneered the study of how people send out and receive these nonverbal messages.
Nonverbal communication can be defined simply as the communication between people omitting all the words. It's just the music. That is, facial expression, body movement, tone of voice. Those would be the primary channels. One of the things that we've found is that very often the channels of nonverbal communication are redundant, as we might expect, and by that I mean they're all telling the same story, so that the tone of voice may be warm and supportive, the facial expressions may be warm and supportive, and the body movements may be warm and supportive. Other times, quite often in fact, the different channels of nonverbal communication are in contradiction to each other, and the face may be saying something quite differently from what the tone of voice is saying.
Something really goes drastically wrong. I really don't think it'll be our fault.
And we know, for example, that in deception, when people are lying to each other, if you want to catch a liar, you will do better to pay attention to the liar or the potential liar's tone of voice than to watch their face. The face is too easy for the liar to control, so that the face is under our own control to a much greater degree than our body, and our body is under our own control to a greater degree than our tone of voice.
Rosenthal has also investigated how subtle aspects of nonverbal communication influence the medical treatment of alcoholics.
We tape recorded a 1-minute clip of the doctors telling us what had been their experience with alcoholics. And for each one of the doctors, we had their success rate in getting alcoholics to go into treatment. What we found was that if we took these 1-minute tape clips for our 9 doctors, ran them through a special filtering device that removed the content and left only the tone of voice, we could predict or post-dict how well these doctors would do in getting their alcoholics to go into treatment. What we found was that if the tone of voice showed considerable hostility, the doctors were very unsuccessful in getting their alcoholic patients to go into treatment. If they showed much less hostility, they were much more successful in getting alcoholics to go into treatment.
The research we've just seen operates at the molecular level of analysis. But there's another broader level of analysis, the molar level. Here we find researchers who investigate large units of behavior of the whole person in complex situations. In this kind of analysis, the individual's cultural background and social experiences must also be factored in. Psychologists working on the molar level might study violent behavior, sexual attraction, worker morale and productivity,
I bought some sleeping pills.
patient-therapist interactions.
What happened when you came to the center?
It would get easy when I had someone to talk about.